What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to the show. It's Thursday, June 30th, 2011. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. And, of course, tomorrow's Friday, the start of the long holiday weekend, Independence Day. And we're going to be really focusing during tomorrow's show. We're going to be talking about what independence really means. We're going to be talking about the history of the Declaration of Independence. We're going to be covering all that kind of stuff. But today we got a lot of stuff to talk about. Our phone lines are open, 877-342-6673, 877-342-6673. Brett's in the control room twiddling the dials and basically ready to answer you when you call on in and talk about whatever we're going to talk about today. Now, obviously, the news continues to be over in Greece. The rioting is continuing. The police are having a hard time dealing with a very, very angry, and justifiably so, Greek people who are just fed up with this whole idea that the government's best course of action is to basically starve the people in order to feed the bankers. And even the United Nations came out today and said that the austerity measures that are being proposed for Greece to inflict on its own people basically amount to humanitarian crimes. Their basic human rights are being violated by the extreme stress of these austerity measures. And so the Greek people, they've had it. They're fed up in this whole situation. And just to show you how tense things are getting, the police are using chemical warfare on the people of Greece. They're using these gases. They're not exactly tear gases, but they cause respiratory distress. They are illegal. They are illegal under international law. And the Athens police are spraying them all over the people and just anything that they can do. Next, it'll be the bullets. And Greece's government is showing itself for the creature that it truly is. And the people of Greece are standing up and they're having to deal with that reality. See, most countries are kept stable because the populations are brainwashed to think that their government is this wonderful organization that only cares about them and is there to protect them and save them from the bad people. And when the people have to wake up and confront the reality of what their government truly is, an oligarchy, self-serving, sociopathic, greedy bunch of money junkies, and the people get very, very angry that they've been lied to and deceived all those years. That's why one of the coffee cups we sell around our store is the fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force it to act like one where everybody can see it. Because as long as people can go along lying to themselves and saying, oh, we have a good government, really, times are hard, but they're really working in our interests, then they won't do anything about what's going on. But when the people are forced to look at the reality of their government straight in the face and say, boy, these really are a bunch of crooks, aren't they? That's when things happen, and that's what Greece is going through right now. That's what Iceland went through. That's what Egypt went through. Spain, somewhere down the road, they're getting close to blowing up. And, of course, over in Great Britain, man, it's just getting crazy over there. We're going to get to that in a minute. The European Union leaders are basically admitting they don't have a plan B to deal with holding the European Union together, of holding the euro together, if Greece defaults. Now, I know we heard on this little news broadcast that the government of Greece has basically gone through making the commitments to the IMF to get more of these pretty printed pieces of paper handed to them, so that dealing with the new, larger, more engulfing debt is now going to be somebody else's problem down the road. That's how all these governments solve this problem, is they borrow more money and say, we'll let the next administration deal with it. But that doesn't mean the people are going to go along with it, and obviously the people are not going to go along with it. And if the people simply stop paying taxes, stop working, or they simply don't have anything more to be taxed, which is the reality all around the world, the looting of the people has succeeded. We're broke. And the whole system's going to come down right now, then the euro is going to collapse. And they don't really have a plan B other than the automatic one that will get the Americans to pay for it somewhere down the road. Now, over in Great Britain, they have been hit with major, major strikes, again, over austerity and this idea that all these bankers could destroy the economies of planet Earth, but we can't go after them. We can't put them in jail. We have to make the people pay for all of this mess. And so Great Britain has been talking the same thing. Austerity. It's austerity when you decide to do it. It's poverty when the government makes you do it. And 750,000 public workers have walked out of their jobs in Great Britain, and apparently a lot of other people, including all of the anti-war groups, are striking in sympathy. This thing is going to really take off, contrary to some of the wishful thinking we were hearing from members of the British government yesterday. So it's getting very intense over there. We're already seeing over here all this talk about, austerity. We've got to deal with the debt. We've got to find ways to pay back the bankers and blah, 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 blah. Okay? So what we're seeing here is we're starting to see the beginnings of that attempt to sell us austerity to the American people. You must make do with less so the bankers can have more. They're just trying to figure out some way they can get you to go along with that. It's a hard sell. Now, according to the Internal Revenue Service, the amount of revenue they're collecting through tax withholding on your paychecks is in decline. And that is signaling that we're either going into a new phase of the Depression, or we're accelerating the one that we're already in. It's kind of an arbitrary and somewhat academic distinction, but the news is the economy is not getting better. It is continuing to get worse. And the government's only solution is we got to raise taxes. We got to raise taxes. Obama's talking about $600 billion in taxes. California is now imposing sales tax on all online transactions, even for companies that are not in California. If you sell in California, you've got to pay. You've got to collect and give them the sales tax. And the result is that companies like Amazon are just disconnecting from California websites, saying, we don't want to bother with this. We don't want to have to pay people to do the accounting. We don't want to deal with California's franchise tax board. We're not making any money out there anyway because the state is crippled. So we're just going to shut off. So this brings me to an analogy. I've talked about this on my previous network. I don't think I've mentioned it here, and I think it's time that I did so. You might think of the nation as a pickup truck. And the economy is the engine that's running underneath the hood. And it's a nice pickup truck, and it's in good repair, and there's a very nice trailer hitch on the back. Okay? And the government is the driver. Now, anybody who any gearheads out there are going to understand that the engine needs a certain amount of its own power just to keep itself going, to overcome the friction in the cylinders and the transmission and the air conditioning and the cooling system. All these things take a little bit of power. So when you say, the truck has, 500 horsepower, a dumb driver is going to think, I've got 500 horsepower coming out the back of those wheels. No, actually you don't. You have a lot less. Because a lot of that power is taken up to keep the engine itself running. And the same is true for an economy. A lot of the economy's functionality requires other parts of the economy to be sending money in and taking money out. It's a huge interconnected machine, just like an automobile engine and a transmission. So far, so good. Now, the load in the load bed of the truck, that's taxation. So if your truck is driving up a hill and it's carrying that load, and the driver is saying to himself, well, I could do better. I could put more load in the back because I've got 500 horsepower out there. And he starts loading up the truck, and it starts taking more and more energy to get the truck up the hill. And then worse, the driver puts a trailer on the back of that trailer and puts more load on there. And all of a sudden you get to the point where the load on the truck and the amount of energy needed to keep the engine running exceed the amount of energy the engine can produce, and it stalls. It doesn't just slow down, it literally starts to stutter, and the engine will simply lock up. That's what happens when you've got too much taxation on the economy. We're starting to see that already. And so every time that driver gets out and says, well, I'm just going to, start it again and put more load in there because I got to do more work because that makes me more money. And he's being a very stupid driver because he doesn't understand that the engine is going to run better if you have a moderate load on that truck. You can't just keep piling more load on it. especially when it shows signs of stalling, and yet that is exactly what the government continues to do. Another $600 billion of taxes coming from Obama, California sales tax on internet sales. Every day there's another proposition for another tax. And these people are dreaming and delusional. There is no more horsepower in this engine. In fact, there's kind of less, because they've been stripping off some of the parts of this engine and sending them to China or Taiwan or these other places where the jobs have been offshoring. So it's a very foolish way of running an economy and a truck, and we're on the verge of stalling. And adding more taxes makes about as much sense as adding more weight to a truck that is already unable to handle the load that's there. We're taxed out. We're broke. Raising taxes won't solve the problem. It'll shut the system down. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about the economic situation, the very obvious deterioration, and the very obvious absence of any indications whatsoever by the government and corporate industry to try and reverse the trends. And a very telling situation came out. Henry Kissenger was being interviewed by Charlie Rose, and he made a very interesting comment where he said the current financial crisis could be used to advance a new world order. And so Kissenger is basically saying, well, as long as the world economy and political situation is in such turmoil, now's the time to bring about a global government. Which, of course, would lead one to suspect that the current economic disaster, rather than being simply the result of greed and stupidity by the money junkies, may have been an engineered takedown to pave the way for the new globalist society. We've talked about this before, that they cannot drop the national borders unless we're all living as third world poverty. Little mud huts burning cattle patties for our heat. Until we're all living the same lifestyle as the absolute poorest human being on planet Earth, they can't drop the borders and have their wonderful global fascist economic dictatorship. Now, we know that there have been intentional projects undertaken to sell this idea of a global government. This whole nonsense about human-caused global warming was designed to sell us the necessity for a global environmental authority to whom individual nations would cede authority over certain aspects of manufacturing in our personal lives. That was one of the pillars on which they were building this foundation for a global government. The second one, you probably remember a couple of years ago, was the When Pigs Fly flu, when the World Health Organization literally changed the threshold for a pandemic way, 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 way down so they could take this flu and say, oh, it's a pandemic, we've got to sell vaccines. And at the same time, behind the scenes, they were pushing for a global health organization with administrative authority over medical care and treatment in all countries, sort of like a gigantic planetary HMO. And, of course, the third foundation was the economy. But that one is not going to work out because most people understand that it was globalism, this dropping of the international borders, that allowed the mortgage-backed security fraud carried out in the United States of America to basically take the entire planet down with it. And most people understand more globalism is not going to fix that problem. We need to think about regionalization. We need to recompartmentalize planet Earth for the same reason you put fireproof doors in buildings and watertight bulkheads in ships, so that a disaster in one area does not threaten the structure as a whole. We've seen the downside of globalism, not just in the economic problems, but when Japan had their quake and tsunami and lost a huge amount of their electrical generating capacity. Factories here in the United States of America that were part of the new globalist model of commerce and were dependent on parts that were being made in Japan had to shut down because the parts aren't available anymore. And the factories in the United States that could have made those parts have all been shut down and the machinery sold off. And they're just giant rusting hulks. monuments to this idea that you could run an entire planet the way you run a small town. And that's just absolutely not true. So we need to take our lessons from the nuclear disasters, from the oil disasters, from the wildfires and the flooding and the economic disasters, and we need to understand that Henry Kissinger is wrong. I know he dreams of a global government because he sees himself as a key player in that new world order. The people who are pushing this global government all see themselves as being that government. They're not setting up a global government to basically say, okay, now that it's set up, I'm going to go retire. They're not going to do that. They all want to be as close to the throne as they can be. And they don't understand that a global government is going to have very negative consequences for the people. I mean, every time I hear the phrase global government, I remind myself that that's what Alexander the Great wanted. And that's what Napoleon wanted. And that's what the Roman Caesars wanted. And that's what Hitler wanted. And it was great for the people up there at the top, in their palaces, and their gold, and their hot and cold running slaves. But it was always terrible for the people who had to basically bear the load and do the work and pay the taxes, whether it was Rome or Macedonia or the Third Reich. And a global new world order will be the worst fascist state in history, and I'll tell you why. Because we know it's being brought into being with fraud and deception. And so this new world order that Henry Kissinger is all hot and bothered to bring about will not dare allow freedom of speech and inquiry and freedom of thought. They won't dare, because they would not survive the lies and deceptions of their own creation. And so this new world order that Kissinger dreams of will be the most tyrannical state in history. The U.S. is already leading the way. They come into your home and tell you what kind of light bulbs you got to use. They're putting their hands down the front of your pants everywhere you go in the country. Do you think they're going to stop doing that when the New World Order comes about? Heck no. This is the training ground. They're using America to find out what can we get away with. And we're going to use it on the entire planet. So we need to think about abandoning this push for a global government. It sounds wonderful in science fiction, but it's simply not going to work, not for the people. It'll be great for the rulers and terrible for the ruled. And I'll tell you this, when you have a global government, I don't care how noble the agenda for starting it, what happens when you get the next Hitler or Stalin or Queen Zingwa from Angola as the ruler, and there is no other part of Earth that can stop them from doing what they want to do? Then you're really in trouble. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're finishing up on the economy this segment. There is a breaking story from Bloomberg, not the mayor, the financial news service, that Geithner may be getting ready to leave government service and go on to his reward, supposedly, over at Goldman Sachs. So he sold out the American economy to make the bankers happy, and now he's going to get his nice little retirement and his cushy job over there at Goldman. Well, I like to call it Gold in my sacks, because that seems to be their attitude over there, but it's Goldman Sachs. When Geithner departs, whether it's now or at the end of the Obama administration, he will take with him a rather dubious record. Because while Geithner has been the Secretary of the Treasury, the national debt has grown far larger than under any other Treasury Secretary in the history of the United States of America. Geithner's probably out there saying, I'm number one, I'm number one. Do I get a medal for that? So, now down here in the real world, away from the ivory towers of Wall Street and Washington, D.C., or marble towers as the case may be, Wisconsin schools are going to be forced to lay off 354 teachers. That's a lot of teachers. They're laying off a total of 519 employees, of whom most are going to be those teachers. Basically, Governor Scott Walker has signed a 2-year budget into law that slashes funding all across the state. And the tax revenues that are being collected go right into the bankers. Go right into the bankers to pay off these loans on the pretty printed pieces of paper. And the money junkies need the money because they need it to stay out of prison, is really what it comes down to. Scott Walker is economically savaging his own people because the Wall Street CEOs behind the mortgage-backed security fraud that wrecked the economy don't want to have to go to prison for it. And because Scott Walker and virtually every other politician in the United States of America gets huge campaign donations from the financial services industry, they're not going to kill the goose that lays the golden campaign check. So when Wall Street comes down and they have their mortgage-backed security fraud, and they destroy the economy, and they empty those pensions, the correct course of action is we're going to tell the pensioners, sorry, you're going to have to make do without. We know you paid in all those years, but golly gee shuckies, that's just the way these things happen. Force majeure, or God's will, or whatever excuse. If you're a real patriot, you would go off and die right now, so we don't have to take care of you. And it really comes down to that. The lives of the American people continue to be looted, so the bankers can stay solvent and survive this economic disaster of their own making. Now, over in Johnston City, Illinois, the place is pretty much shut down. They're out of money. They're out of money. They're up to their neck in debt. Nobody wants to loan them any more money because they very obviously have no means to pay it back. So would the last person leaving Johnston City, Illinois, kindly turn off the lights if they haven't already been shut off for failure to pay? Minnesota is looking at a government shutdown over the tax and debt question at midnight tonight. They're trying to basically blackmail their own people by saying, all the public parks are going to be closed over the 4th of July weekend. You don't want that to happen. You got to call your representatives and pressure them to say, make the deal. But any deal being made is going to come back to that same mantra, you must make do with less so the bankers can have more. Wall Street's mortgage-backed securities fraud broke this economy. And the politicians seem to feel that it is their task to force the American people to understand that you and you alone must take responsibility to pay for this mess. That's basically what it comes down to. You ever see this cartoon? I forget where I saw it. It's a multi-panel cartoon, and basically what it is the first panel is a guy getting yelled at by his boss, and he doesn't dare stand up to his boss. So the guy goes home, and he yells at his wife. And the wife doesn't want to stand up to the husband, so she turns around and she screams at the kids. And the kids can't talk back to mother, so they turn around and they kick the dog. And that seems to be a very good model for life in our society, where when we are abused, we don't strike back at the people harming us. We turn around and we look for somebody to take our anger out on. And it's not fair. And we understand it isn't fair. If Wall Street's mortgage-backed security fraud wrecked the economy, why are they not paying the entire cost of it? Why is the government's solution to turn around and take our homes and take our jobs and say, well, we're sorry, but we're working for the greater good? And it isn't greater good because Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve and now one of the governors, told CNBC today that all of this massive federal stimulus spending has not had any effect at all. Or he said it's had little impact, was the words that he used. And that's a foregone conclusion because it wasn't a stimulus, it was a buyback of all the fraudulent mortgage-backed securities from all these foreign banks and investment companies. So with all of that money going out there, of course it's not going to help things here in the United States of America domestically. All these bailouts and stimuluses to the American banks were taking trillions of dollars from the American people and giving it to the banks to loan back to the American people at interest. That was the idea they thought was going to work, and it didn't. Because unlike the government, we, the American people, understand we don't want to borrow money we don't know for a fact that we can pay back. We don't have a magic printing press to get out of debt with. We don't have another administration we can simply drop this problem on after the next election. We don't want to live in debt, even though we are under an economic system that cannot function without everybody being in debt. If everybody was out of debt, there would be no money in circulation under this business model. And so Greenspan is admitting what we all know from just walking around our towns and cities and neighborhoods and seeing all the empty retail spaces and the foreclosed homes and all the shut down services and closed schools. We know it's not working. We know it wasn't working. We understand it was never intended to make our lives better. It was intended to save Wall Street. It was intended to save the big money center banks. And in the long run, it's not going to succeed because of that fundamental flaw in private central banks' debt-based currency. There is nothing you can do that does not end up with debt exceeding available money. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing the government can do. There's nothing the bankers can do other than to scrap the entire system. If anybody has a way other than conquering another country and stealing their gold and oil and selling it and saying, here, Federal Reserve, take all of our money. It is a system designed to extract wealth. It's a system designed to enslave. And it's time to let it go. Think about that as we head into Independence Day weekend. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
We will not go down in the night without a fight. You can burn up our mosques and our homes and our schools, but our spirit will never die. We will not go down in Gaza tonight.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Little factoid you need to be aware of here. The spending on the so-called war on terror, which is the new branding for World War III, we're basically at the point of how much money we spent on the Second World War. We're already there. We've spent enough money to be in a world war. We've certainly invaded enough countries and attacked enough countries to be a world war. We're on a two-front war on two separate continents, which is technically a world war, and now we're spending like it's a world war. But by golly, we're going to turn around and we're going to slap those teachers and firefighters and police officers and make them understand they got to live on less, or the terrorists will win. All right, we're going to go to the phones. Justin in Wisconsin. Aloha, Justin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Hey, I just had a question for you. Have you ever had Ellen Brown as a guest on your show or considered inviting her? Because I think she's just great.
Yeah, we've talked about it. We have not had her on the show. We're going to try and get her, though.
I saw her a recent interview with another on another show, and she was just fabulous, down-to-earth lady, and knew what she was talking about. And I think it's such an important issue what the state of North Dakota has done with their own state bank. Now they create their own credit.
Well, they're not the only ones now. There's another 7 states are starting to set up their own state banks to try and break free from the Federal Reserve.
I have read that, and I think that is a move in the right direction. And anyway, she just lays out a very compelling case, and it'd be great if you could get her on the show. Or anyway, it's great that she's out there.
I'll definitely do that.
It's great that she's out there advancing the topic and getting that out there, because I had never heard of that, before reading a couple articles by her and listening to her just within the last couple of years, and it was quite an eye opener.
Yeah, it is. It's rather amazing. It's rather amazing because what North Dakota is doing and these other states are getting ready to do is the kind of economic system this nation was founded with. The reason we're having this big holiday over this weekend is we fought a revolution to be free of private central banks and debt-based currencies, and we broke free of that. And now all of a sudden we're back in the same system, and this is why they don't really teach a lot about the Currency Act in the schools. In fact, I remember very clearly when I was going through school just being taught, this is the way banks operate. This is the way banks have always operated. And, of course, now we know it's absolutely not true. The original model for the United States of America, the model that North Dakota and these other states are getting ready to follow, is the government issues currency into the public to purchase what the government needs. The money circulates through the public, interest-free to facilitate commerce, and then the state taxes it back at the end of the cycle to balance the books. And that's the system that works best for the government and the people. When you add a private bank into the mix, the only thing that's different is that every time there's a transaction, the bank is taking a piece of the action, and they bring absolutely nothing else into the equation. And the only reason these private central banks exist is because they're always able to find Congress critters and presidents who will sell out the people to a private central bank in exchange for 30 pieces of silver. We've had 3 of these private central banks. They have all 3 brought the nation to the edge of destruction. 3 strikes and you are out. This model of private central banks and debt-based currencies is a recent invention. It is not the way banking has worked throughout history. And it's a failed experiment, and we understand it's failed. We need the government to admit it's a failed experiment. We need another Andy Jackson. We need another Abraham Lincoln. We need another John F. Kennedy who were manly enough to stand up and say, okay, you bastards, you've made enough money. It's time to shut it down and let the people keep more of what they produce for themselves.
You're talking about the National Central Bank as opposed to all private banks in general.
I'm talking about the central bank of issue. I mean, banks when they were sort of like something that, you could either use or not use. And, that is a good thing that allows money to be pooled and loaned out to facilitate creation of new businesses. But when you have a private central bank that is in charge of the nation's entire economy, they're not running it for the benefit of the people. They're running it as a business to generate profits for themselves.
It's bad news.
It's very bad news. It's never worked for the people.
What they're doing in Oregon is you got one gentleman up there in the legislature working with the local private banks and selling them on the idea before the legislation even gets introduced into committee so that there's buy-in. Because as in North Dakota, they're using North Dakota as a model, and you can have many, many private central banks, local banks, like, your local central bank your local bank that you would see on Main Street, and they coexist with the bank in North Dakota. So it's actually what his selling point to the local banks in Oregon was that there's more privately owned local banks in North Dakota than there, per capita or whatever the measure he's using, than there is nationwide. So it's actually healthy for smaller banks to have this, state-owned financing facility.
Of course it is.
I think there'd be a lot of winners, and I just hope that message gets out there. I think Ellen Brown's doing a great job, and I think you are as well in promoting that message, and I thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the call. No, there's absolutely no question. That model of banking works best for the society as a whole and the people. The model of banking that was brought in with the first and second banks of the United States and the Federal Reserve, which is actually the third bank of the United States, but they had to rename it because people understood that the Bank of the United States was a bad idea. And the model there is the bank is there not to serve the people and the society and the nation, but simply to serve itself. And it's basically, it is a monumental fraud. It's a legalized counterfeiting operation. I mean, everything the Federal Reserve does monetarily was originally a death penalty offense under the Coinage Act of 1792 here in the United States of America. They had to change the laws to legalize what the private bankers were doing in terms of debasing the currency and putting out paper notes without any backing to them whatsoever other than wishful thinking. And again, at the core of this whole system is this fundamental flaw, or design feature, depending upon your point of view, that because all the money in circulation is the product of a loan to the government, to businesses, to individuals, that the total aggregate debt of the system always exceeds the available money supply. The instant that first dollar bill, that dollar note, goes into circulation, more money is owed to the private bankers than is actually in existence. And then they got you. Because as long as you believe in the rules, and you believe that the laws are there to serve you, and you go along with it, you are forever trapped. And you and I and everybody listening to this show had nothing to say about whether we wanted to live under such a system. It was created in 1913, long before we were born. And all we ever got in the school was, oh yeah, this is the way it's always been. And now we understand, no, it isn't. This is a perversion. We're going to be talking about it more tomorrow when we talk about the American Revolution and we talk about the push for independence. And a big part of that independence was an independence from private central banking. Our ancestors risked life and limb, lost it in a lot of cases to free us from this exact kind of banking model. And later presidents and Congresses just happily sold us right back into the same scam for a piece of the action. It's all about the money. It's all about the corruption. We are exactly in the same situation right now today that the colonials were in 1776. And we're going to go into that in a lot more detail tomorrow as well. We're going to be going through the Declaration of Independence, and we're going to be pointing out all the little things, the reasons why we said it's time to fire the government, because they all ring true today. All righty, let's see. We're going to move right along here. Speaking of constitutional rights and growing dictatorship, the Democrats are now screaming for more gun control because of this Operation Fast and Furious. Well, we, the people, had nothing to do with Fast and Furious. This was the BATF giving a bunch of guns to Mexican drug criminals, ostensibly to track where the guns went, but I think possibly to create this kind of runaway gunfire in the streets scenario that the Democratic anti-gun agenda is now saying, oh, see, this is why we need more gun control. No, it isn't why we need more gun control, because the criminals will always get the guns. They always have. The United States understands they have pushed the American people to the edge of revolution. They wish to disarm us. That was the British mistake at Lexington and Concord. And that's Concord, Massachusetts. Bachman, not Concord, New Hampshire. Clueless twit. Speaking of clueless twits, Michelle Bachmann, about a year ago, talking about seeing the true colors shining through, she came out with this comment that if the United States of America rejected Israel, if we did not support Israel unquestioningly, that God would curse America. Ooh, we're going to be cursed. Now, Ms. Bachmann, I don't know if you've taken a look outside your window lately, but it seems that over this last year since you made that comment, the more we support Israel's atrocities against the Palestinians, the more curses seem to be hitting us, like record snow and record flooding and record wildfires and record political corruption. And now we've got this possibility of radiation leaks over in New Mexico, where they're having more lightning today, sparking more forest fires around those nuclear storage sites. And, of course, up in Nebraska, where we've confirmed NRC did declare a 10-mile evacuation zone that the corporate media is not reporting on at all. So, Michelle Bachmann, I hate to be the one to break this to you, but the only people claiming that God wants us to support Israel are the Israelis. And a bunch of child molesters in funny-looking robes desperate to hire good Jewish lawyers. Nobody else is buying this nonsense. And I would like to remind you that in the First Amendment, there's this little thing about not supporting a particular religion, not respecting any one religion over any other. And Thomas Jefferson wrote, the idea was to separate church and state. So please don't bring God into discussions about foreign policy, because it's unconstitutional for you to do so. We're going to take a break for news and commercials. We'll be back in about 7 minutes. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back into this other stuff here, I got an email during the break from somebody who's up there in Nebraska saying the berm around the Fort Calhoun nuclear power station didn't collapse. Apparently, the word up there is that one of the workers ran into it with a forklift. and punctured it. And I'd heard that there was a worker accident. I didn't know the details of it, but apparently that's the reason the berm collapsed and the water poured into the power station, and now we have this 10-mile evacuation zone around there, which is being reported. ABC Channel 8, local ABC affiliate, reported it, but the rest of the corporate media around America, no. Kaylee What's-Her-Face and movie stars and all this other distraction kind of stuff. So anyway, moving right along. The situation is not over regarding Fort Calhoun. We are starting to see upriver, up into the mountains, up into the Tetons. The big melt is now starting. All this huge, huge snowpack, 12 feet of snow is still in some places. And now that we're into June, going into July, it is really starting to melt. It's coming down. We're seeing a lot of flooding starting to happen way up on those far tributaries, and it's just going to start a second pulse of water coming on down. The Upper Provo River, all the farms are flooding out there. It's just very intense, and we continue to hear troubling rumors about the Gavin's Point Dam in South Dakota. It's basically, they're saying that it's showing signs of extreme stress from all the pressure of the floodwater, and it's way up at the top, and they're running the floodgates wide open, but there's so much water pouring in from upstream. If any one of these dams lets go, then we're going to see a huge wash of water come on down, and it's going to hit both of those nuclear power stations. We're not out of the woods on this one yet. Now, speaking of radiation here, you've probably seen news reports from time to time about how a new drug or a new treatment or a new something is going to perform medical miracles, but it's still 5 years away because of all the mandatory testing by the FDA and all the rest of that paperwork stuff, most of which isn't all that rigorous, but there's a paperwork process they have to go through. The only time they get around that is when they fast-track certain things like vaccines, which always turn out to be really horrible for us. And somebody pointed out in one of the articles we have linked to whatreallyhappened.com today that all of these X-ray and terahertz scanners were put into the airports all over the United States in literally just a matter of weeks. And there was no independent testing or trials of the suitability of mass X-raying and terahertzing a lot of people. And I want to make a distinction here right now. There are two types of scanners involved here. There are the X-ray machines, which are, those are the backscatter machines, but it's still X-rays. And X-rays cause radiation damage. They say, oh, it's low power, but it's still X-rays. Then there are the terahertz radio wave scanners. And they're going on saying there's no evidence of any harm for these. Well, this is a brand new technology. And they don't know any more about terahertz scanners today than they did about those shoe store fluoroscopes back in the 1930s and 1940s, which turned out to be killing the shoe store salesman. Oh, okay, yeah. I'm gonna put this topic on hold. We're gonna come back to it in a little bit. Karen Tostado is joining us on the air. Karen, thank you for getting in here. And what's going on in your part of the world?
Well, my husband and I are striking in solidarity with Greece and with the UK. We're not going to buy anything until after the 4th of July because we know that we're not free. And I think that if people really took this to heart and understood, it's the same group of criminals in the background, and if Greece falls, we're not far from falling ourselves, you know. I was glad to hear you earlier talk about it might not be just mistakes, because I don't think it is, Michael. I think that it's a plan, and I've got a quote here from Paul Warburg, who is a CFR member and the architect of the Federal Reserve. This is back February 17th of 1950, and he says, "We will have world government, whether or not we like it. The only question is whether world government will be achieved by conquest or by consent." And that was in an address to the U.S. Senate.
Well, we are always hearing about these people who want a global government. George Bush, the elder, was always talking about, you know, the New World Order and getting rid of the useless eaters and all these other very draconian comments. And I'm sure that sociopaths who have absolutely no emotional connection to ordinary people and see us just as assets or a herd to be culled and dealt with and managed, are probably thinking, oh, the world would be so much better if we got rid of 9/10 of the human population, and then we'd all have lots of room and lots of food, and life would be wonderful. And there's actually this, the last one of Tom Clancy's books that I really liked was called Rainbow Six, and the villains are these very rich people, amazingly enough, pharmaceutical industries, and they decide to fake a major epidemic, and then when you get vaccinated for the epidemic, the people they want to keep alive get the A vaccine, and the people that they want to go away get the B vaccine, and this is their plan for depopulating planet Earth. And I will be the first one to admit that we have a population problem here on Earth, and we always will, because sex is a lot more fun than dying. But
well, now, Michael, I got to disagree with you there. I used to think that...
Then you're doing it wrong.
Well, the population in the United States has been going down since the 1950s. I think that what it is, what it looks like to me, is that all of the immigration and the shoving us out of our farms and out of our country homes and into the city makes it look like more, but when in traveling across this country, there are wide expanses that have not yet been populated, but they cram us into cities, and they want to try and strip us of our nationality and make us believe that we are the enemy, when instead, I think it's a lack of education, it's mismanagement, and, Bill Gates will be the first one to tell you that he wants to use vaccines for population control, which is a really ugly mess. But right now, with the world in such... Pardon?
I said he and Warren Buffett.
Yeah, it's a mess, and if folks would really start thinking about what they have to lose if they did strike, if we want to talk about being free here, then we're dreaming. We're not free. We're indentured servants, and so are our unborn children. And we have an opportunity to look around us at what is happening with the economies of the world, and those money junkies have been in power for so long they don't want to let it go, but it's a small group of bullies, and we outnumber them, and we can erase all this fraudulent debt, kick them out, and start over when we unite and stand together. At least that's how we feel.
Well, it's already happened. They did it in Iceland, and the Iceland economy is on the way up, and Iceland is saying we're not going to have anything to do with the international bankers and their debt-based currencies. Egypt just told the IMF to take a hike. All of these countries understand how they were driven into poverty, how it was done to them, and they're saying we're not going to do it anymore. All we need is for that same enlightenment to come here to the United States of America. What you were saying about the cities, think of cities as human farms, and they want to pile as many people into these cities as they possibly can, because when you're all in one place crowded into a city, it's easier to take taxes from you. It's easier to take your children and make armies and send them off to conquer the world. If they're having to run all over the great wide expanse of the country, just to get one more person, it's simply not practical. And so the reason for encouraging movement to the city and getting off the rural areas is to make you accessible to those who want to plunder you and loot you. Cities are nothing but ways of maximizing the profit from the population.
Stack them and pack them,
Exactly.
And we can make a difference, though, and when I talk about being in solidarity, we're not going to go shopping. When we do shop, we shop locally. We spend a little more money that way, but we support the people in our community. We buy from the farmers market, and we're not going to be spending a dime until after the 4th of July. And I'm going to call my misrepresentatives and tell them that we're striking in solidarity with Greece and with all the countries in the world, with the UK and trying to lose their pensions. It's all about a small group of people who want to own the world, they want to depopulate, and they want us, and they already own us through the tricks that they've done with our signatures, with Social Security, with all this ridiculousness. We're collateral on the debt, and we don't need to do that. We need to free ourselves. And first we need to free our mind and understand. Pardon?
I said, and we never agreed to that. We never had the chance to say, yes, I will place my life as collateral on the government's debt. This was all done before we were born. And, I think fundamentally most people are going to understand that no government has a right to make promises on the lives of people not yet alive. It is fundamentally wrong. It is a crime against future generations. I think that's a new term that we need to start using. That we've got crimes against humanity, but I think we need to realize there are crimes against future generations that are even worse. Karen, stick with me. We're going to keep you through the commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Karen Tostado from United We Strike, and I understand that we're probably going to see a lot of economic slowdown over the holiday weekend, because I was at our local supermarket here this morning, and they have a display of flags, American flags, show your patriotism and pride. And the rack was completely full, no empty spaces, and the little price tags on the side. It started, $3.90, then marked down to $2.10, and then marked down to like $1.90. This is before 4th of July, and they're marking the price down hugely, and they still can't sell any of these things. And I think it indicates that absolutely the American people have come to understand this government is nothing to feel proud of. This government is not taking care of the nation. And I saw another display where they've got all the picnic supplies, the paper plates and napkins and everything, and they've all got the flag on there, America stands true, and all these other, jingoistic slogans about, how we're going to go out and whip the terrorists and everything. That rack was full. And I talked to the checkout lady who was the cashier who was checking me out of the market, and I said, is anybody buying this stuff? She says, no. It's all going to have to go back to the factory to be recycled. Nobody's touching the stuff. The only people who are buying any of this patriotic nonsense are either in the military or they work for the government. But for everybody else, no. Don't even want to go near it. And I think just in general, at this point, I'm getting a strong sense that people are outside of the 15th of the month. They're just not bothering with paperwork anymore. They're just not. They don't see any point in continuing to go along with this charade that there's some kind of a system in place to take care of the people, as long as you fill out the correct form and turn it in by the deadline, this little 27B/Z. The whole nation is shutting down, and the American people understand that the government is taking care of itself, and the bankers and everybody else. We're all sitting here feeling like the third-class passengers on the Titanic. We know the ship is going down, and we're locked on the wrong side of the little cage door from the lifeboats.
Really bust a move here, too, because we are way too apathetic. I'm happy that we're not being sold useless junk. I think a lot of it is because people don't have the money to buy anything extra, but we sit here and condone out-and-out fraud in the highest office in this country. He's nothing but a CEO. BS. That's all we get from Barry Soetoro is BS, only now it comes with murder because he is the hitman. We've allowed ourselves to be the hitman for the New World Order, and the UN can tell us what to do, and he can go completely against the War Powers Act and declare war and be murdering people in Libya with our money, and we're up to I'm not sure how many billions now, but we cannot protect our nuclear facilities here in this country. We cannot protect the Gulf of Mexico. We can't stop the Navy-Army war games in the Pacific. Folks, what is it going to take? If we stand with Greece, if we stopped spending, it could be over so quickly. Imagine what would happen if we joined with them and if we said, no, I'm not going to buy anything from multinational corporations. I'm going to make my voice heard in solidarity with people all over the world who are being either IMF'd or EMF'd. Don't you think it's time?
Oh, I absolutely agree. And if we're going to be forced to live austere lives anyway by the money junkies, then let us simply work within our own local community to support our local craftspeople, our local farmers, and all the rest of that stuff. Because, and again, I'm going to talk about this a lot tomorrow, the reason we call Independence Day, the reason we don't call it Liberty Day or Freedom Day, is because the whole point of the revolution was to allow us to no longer be dependent on a faraway government and a faraway bank and faraway corporations or companies whose products we were ordered to buy. And that was what they meant by independence. It isn't simply freedom and running around and doing what you want to do. It was breaking the chains of imposed dependency on the government in London, the Bank of England, the British Trade, East India Company, And we were allowed to basically make our own way in the world and not simply be a vassal of the money powers of the day. And that's what they meant by independence.
Real freedom is the ability to say no. No, you cannot take my money and spend it on depleted uranium weapons that you're using in another part of the world to destroy the planet. No, you cannot take my son or my daughter to go fight in your undeclared illegal occupations or military kinetic actions, or however you want to say it. It's still murder. It's murder, it's death and destruction, and we have been fooled, and the people in uniform are being used to implement banking procedures. They're working against their own best interests and the future of their descendants. You want to talk about the future generation of crime? It's certainly happening, unfortunately, in the military and the police families, who are brainwashed into thinking they're protecting their country when they're protecting bankers' interests.
That's exactly right. What you were saying about freedom means the freedom to say no. If you can't say no, then you're not free. You are a slave. We have never had the chance to say no to living under the control of a private central bank issuing the public currency at interest. We are therefore slaves to that system because we were not given the chance to refuse it. There is no freedom without the freedom to say no. And what America needs to find, especially think about this in this coming weekend, we need to regain the right and the moral necessity to say no. We will never be free until we learn how to say no.
We have to learn that. Well, we pretty much are indentured servants. You know, we're workers. We're under contract with the employer, which is the government, for all of our lives. And so are our unborn descendants. And that really is criminal. And while we're doing all this, we're ignoring the fact that right here in this country is where we need to rebuild. You know, we could save so much money if we went on strike and said we're not going back to work until all fraudulent banking debt is canceled, until no more foreign military aid is given out, and until you bring our men and women, husbands, mothers, until you bring our people home to start helping us rebuild from the inside out. And we're all bankrupt. None of us can afford to pay, and we certainly don't want to give our country to the Chinese to make up for more fraudulent banking debt. You know, just like the Greek people don't want to sell off the beauty of their island.
Karen, we got to take a break here.
It will only happen when we unite and come together.
Okay, we got to take a break. Thank you, Karen. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And is Robert there from Brooklyn? Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind? Okay. Robert, are you there? Okay. Is Karen still there then? Okay, I guess we lost both the calls there, and we had a little miscommunication with our control room. Alrighty, so I want to get back to the situation about irradiating American travelers. We have the X-ray machines. X-rays have been around for a while. We understand they're very, very dangerous. These new machines, though, the terahertz machines, this is a brand new technology, and we don't really know any more about how it interacts with human beings than we did X-rays back in the 1930s. It's the new wonder technology. Everybody's using it. And they're only now beginning to understand that these terahertz radio waves do, in fact, cause damage to your DNA. We're now finding out that the TSA falsely claimed that the National Institutes of Standards and Technology had tested these machines and found them to be safe. NIST has now come out and said, no, we never said that, and we don't do that kind of testing. And so the TSA is basically standing there saying, but, you know. But the point we're making is these are X-ray machines. These are medical scanners. These radio waves and X-rays are penetrating your skin and interacting with your DNA. And what they're finding out, what they found out over at MIT and Johns Hopkins, is that the terahertz radio waves don't have the energy to completely tear apart the DNA, which was the threshold everybody was looking at, but they can shake the DNA enough to where some of the links break between the two interlocked helixes, those little phosphate bonds. They'll come apart. And then they're sort of hanging there like free radicals waiting for other chemicals to come along and bond there and create these little glitches in the DNA chain, which will cause transcription errors, which can lead to cancer. That is the danger and the risk of these things. And we're now finding out that TSA was told there was a danger with these machines, and they still put them into the airports. These X-ray, these terahertz scanners in use at the airport on all of the people who are traveling would not be allowed in hospitals because they've never passed the kind of testing such invasive scanner technology has to go through in order to be declared safe for medical use. Now, TSA has blown it once again. Apparently, a stowaway got on in a New York flight, went all the way to Los Angeles, cleared security, had no ID. And, again, TSA is completely useless. Meanwhile, out in Orange County, Southern California, the police have now recovered $30,000 in stolen items. This TSA agent at the Los Angeles airport was stealing things out of people's luggage and just taking them to the pawn shop, as opposed to the guy in Newark who was putting them up on eBay. Now, TSA is understanding they're not looking very positive to the American people, and so they've announced they're going to stop molesting little children. Of course, the Vatican's been saying that for years, so I'm not about to hold my breath on this one. But the real damning piece of information that's coming down here is that documents have surfaced that TSA was informed by knowledgeable people, experts in the field, that these scanners they put in the airport are dangerous. They pose a health risk. And now we are starting to see cancer clusters among the TSA workers at the airports. Now, I am not expecting you to feel any sympathy for the TSA workers, because they have been using their positions to lord over us and grab our wives and our daughters. And I have no sympathy for them at all. I have no sympathy for them whatsoever. All the more so because we tried to warn them. We tried to say, these are untested machines, and we're looking at a repeat of the shoe store fluoroscope scandal. I hope these TSA workers sue the TSA and Michael Chertoff for all their medical costs. Of course, we know Congress will pass a law saying, well, it was for the national security, and we really can't allow these. The same thing that the government did when all those soldiers marched into the nuclear tests in Nevada, started coming down with cancer and leukemia, and Congress simply indemnified itself and said, we're not responsible. These things happen. We're not to blame. And so all of you TSA workers who thought it was so cool to drop and smash my laptop and make my wife cry, you are all going to die slow, lingering, painful deaths, and your families will be driven into poverty by the medical costs. We know that uninsured medical costs can take even the best prepared financial family and put you right into homelessness. Good. Couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of despots. All right, we're going to take a couple of phone calls. Jeff from Montana. Aloha, Jeff. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How are you? What is on my mind is I even sent you an email a minute ago about Karen's process. And bear with me, please, respectfully. I absolutely disagree with her, and I guess in turn with you for going along with that. She's suggesting that if we strike, if we don't do something, if we don't eat, if we don't shop, if we don't, that we're going to bring them to their knees. And I contend that they don't care. I mean, put it in terms of oxygen. Karen can say, let's all go stand in the corner and stop breathing right now until they give us what we want. And they'll go,
okay,
oh, gosh.
Jeff, you are wrong. And I will explain why you are wrong. Okay? Because ever since the S&L bailouts of the 1980s, the U.S. government has kept the American economy going with a simple promise to foreign investors. You can put your money in the United States of America, and if you make money, you get to keep it. And if something goes wrong, we'll make the taxpayers cover the losses. That's what they demonstrated back in the 1980s with the S&L bailout. That's what they've been doing all along with all of these bailouts and covering all these bad investments in these Wall Street fraudulent mortgage-backed securities. What Karen is suggesting that we do is we send a message to the international investment community. We're not going to pay the bill anymore. If on the day that foreign banks and investment companies understand that the American people aren't going to go along with paying for these financial losses anymore, they're going to take their money out of the American investment market and they're going to find a safer place to park it. And that is going to bring the whole system crashing down. For a revolution to succeed in the United States of America, we don't have to march into Washington, D.C. We don't have to march anywhere. We just have to be seen to survive for just, a couple of months, long enough for the foreign investors to say, look, our money's at risk in the United States. They can't force the American people to pay the bills anymore. We better move our money someplace else. How long did it take for Egypt's government to be brought down? How long did it take for Iceland's government to come crashing down? When the foreign investors get scared and yank their money out, with that much loss all in one time, the whole system's going to come crashing down. So in point of fact, what Karen is suggesting can, in fact, work.
Okay,
it did work in India with Gandhi.
Give me less than a minute to say, and try and listen. Just try. I know you think you're absolutely right on this, and I respect you. You're a much wiser person than most of us. But do you not think that they have other contingency plans for that? I mean, just hear me and think about it for 4...
No, they don't.
Mike, how can
Jeff, goodbye, Jeff. Okay, Jeff is obviously one of those people who is so afraid of the idea that the government might come down that he's living in a fantasy world. What contingency plan does the government have if we, the American people, say we're not going to pay for the losses of botched investments in Wall Street any longer? There is no contingency. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We got another caller waiting on the line. Chris from Oregon. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Thanks. Yeah, Chris PDX, one of your members. As you know, I work as a flight attendant, and funny little story. A couple days ago, my crew and I were waiting to go through security, and we were kind of joking about the groping thing, how some people might like it, just lightening up the mood, and a TSA worker was looking at me, this woman, and I looked at her and I said, oh yeah, hey, by the way, what do y'all think about Texas and their laws about the fondling or the groping? She spun around at me and she says, I think we should build a wall around Texas and get rid of it. I couldn't believe it. I almost fell over.
I think there's a lot of Texans would agree with her. They want to put up a wall and get rid of the rest of the United States of America. They got a very vocal sovereignty movement down there. But, I don't know why they encourage the TSA to be as rude as they are. It almost goes back to the Stanford prison experiment. If you are not familiar with that, you need to go search that down. But they did this experiment in prison psychology where they took a whole bunch of volunteers and they flipped coins to see which would be the guards and which would be the prisoners. And by the end of, just less than a week, they had to stop the experiment because the guards had just gone totally brutal and were just abusing the prisoners, and it was getting to a dangerous situation. And that's what they're doing with the TSA. They give them their badges and the rubber gloves, and they say, you can do whatever you want to those people. And by golly, they are doing precisely that. And, at some point, they're never going to admit to themselves that they were the bad people. You're going to get that reaction that anybody who questioned the TSA, oh, you must be a terrorist. Oh, we got to put a wall around Texas and break them off into a separate, which, like I said, most Texans would agree with right now. But you watch, this problem with the cancer it can only go worse from here. And those TSA workers, TSA may keep them from using the internet and say, you don't talk to those wacko conspiracy websites like whatreallyhappened.com, but they do talk among themselves. And those TSA workers at Logan in Boston are screaming furious because they're all coming down with cancers way out of statistical normal for the general population in that area. And now we've got this documentation that the TSA lied about the safety of the scanners, knew the scanners were not safe and went with them anyway. I mean, there's one heck of a class action lawsuit shaping up there and the billions and billions of dollars in payouts.
I hear you. And if Texas was ever walled off and then on their own, I think I'd move there.
I would be there. I'd be there tomorrow. I absolutely would be.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I just wanted to give you that little story.
All right, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Yeah, we've seen the TSA workers. I ran into one here off duty at the local vitamin store, and she's walking around in her uniform with her nose in the air and all puffed up like she's just the greatest thing that ever walked in. And, of course, now we all understand they're walking dead. They are walking dead. Those machines are killing them. When we go through the airport gates, we get exposed once, and that is a health risk. They are standing near these machines all day long, and there's been no provision for safety because the official line is the machines are harmless. And it is. It's a repeat of the shoe store fluoroscope scandal all over again. All right, moving right along here. My goodness, how time flies when you're having fun. I got to pick and choose what we've got here. Governor Perry, speaking of Texas, is still down there urging the United States government to halt the Gaza flotilla. And I'm sure the people of Texas who voted him into office and pay his salary are just gratified as all heck that with all the problems that are in Texas right now, including the TSA, drug wars on the border, open borders, wildfires, and tornadoes, that Governor Perry's top priority is to halt the Gaza flotilla. I hope the voters of Texas eject this fool next election, because no government can serve two masters. And absolutely, Perry, if he runs for president, as the rumor is going to be, we're going to pound him with this all the way through the campaign. No government can serve two masters. When he was governor, while governor of Texas, he's out there taking care of Israel. We've had enough of that already. We can't afford any more of it. We must elect politicians who will take care of the United States of America first, second, and third. Meanwhile, Netanyahu went public thanking the Prime Minister of Greece for halting the aid flotilla. The flotilla may sail without official permission because, after all, everybody's on strike. There's nobody actually at the harbor, to say you're not allowed to go. So the flotilla may go anyway, although the Irish ship cannot go. They're basically out of the game because of the sabotage to their ship. But for all the people in Greece who are there getting poison gas from the police, the government is screaming, you must live in poverty, and we've got to give the money to the bankers. And with all that stuff going on, the Prime Minister of Greece has time to go out and do favors for Israel. That's another reason for the Greek people to fire the Greek government. Despite all that's going wrong in Greece right now, the PM is still using his taxpayer-funded time to work for a foreign power. The people of Greece need to understand no government can serve two masters, and they need to act on it. Enough of this nonsense here right now. Meanwhile, Israel is trying to take some of the attention off the flotilla and the sabotage and everything. They're trying to, again, kick up a kerfuffle with Syria. They're basically issuing warnings to Assad, attack us and we'll kill you personally. Syria's not going to attack Israel. They have no reason to. They understand that attacking Israel is going to bring about American intervention, which is what America wants. The United States has already decided, yeah, we got all these other countries, we've got soldiers on the ground, Syria is next, because we've got to complete the encirclement of Iran, because we've got to invade Iran, because Israel told us to. And we're already seeing a ramp-up of the Iran propaganda again. They're out there screaming that Iran has a nuclear-capable missile. My Xterra is nuclear-capable. But until I actually have a nuclear warhead, it doesn't mean anything. And the same is true for Iran's missiles. Meanwhile, in what is just this incredible, wonderful, ironic twist, you know that clandestine nuclear weapons factory that Israel has under the Dimona reactor, the one that Israel still insists they don't have, even though Mordecai Vanunu put out photos of it in the European press years ago. And they still say, no, we don't have any nuclear weapon lab down there. Well, in that nuclear weapons lab that Israel says doesn't exist, there are a whole bunch of Israeli nuclear scientists who are about to go on strike because Israel apparently does not treat them very well. And so that's going to be a huge embarrassment because all of a sudden this facility that isn't supposed to exist is going to have picketers around it. Meanwhile, just to prove what wonderful humanitarians are, Israel has passed a law so that when they go in with the bulldozers that are paid for by American taxpayers and they knock down Palestinian homes, the Palestinians will be billed for the demolition. We're going to knock your home down, destroy everything you ever had, and by the way, here's a bill for services rendered. That is the new definition of chutzpah. Video surfaced yesterday of IDF tear-gassing children at a street festival with, clowns and balloons. And they're trying to have fun in the face of all this incredible adversity brought down on them by Israel. And no, the IDF can't stand to see a happy Palestinian child. And they tear gas the kids. Israel's foreign minister is already out there saying, pay no attention to the tear gas. Iran, you've got to watch Iran. They're the evil ones. And remember, Iran is playing by the rules. Iran has signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as has the United States of America. Iran allows all inspections, and there is no evidence Iran is pursuing nuclear weapons. Israel, of course, has never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They've got that clandestine nuclear web under Dimona. They were caught trying to sell nuclear weapons to South Africa, the very activity the NNPT is supposed to be prohibiting. But we're always being told, oh, Iran is the bad country. Got to get those gosh darn Muslims, you know. But again, study the history of forget what you're being told and look at what has actually happened. Iran became an Islamic state in 1979. Since then, they haven't invaded anybody. Can't say the same about Israel. Can't say the same about the United States of America. United States, oh boy, everybody. Constant invasions, constant wars, constant conquests. So who is the threat to world peace? It's not Iran and it's not the Muslims. It's the United States and Israel. This world war, we're the axis of evil. We're the ones trying to invade people to get out of the financial mess the government has created for itself. So, we already talked about the lightning down there in Los Alamos. Again, we're getting a lot of conflicting reports about the fire at Los Alamos. We know that it's already burned over one of the areas used for nuclear testing. EPA is insisting no radiation has been released, but again, we can't trust the EPA. We simply cannot. We are a fool to bet our lives that this one time out of many, the U.S. government is being truthful with us. So apparently the wildfire is just up to almost double the size of just a couple of days ago, and the weather report today was for more lightning storms. So there's a possibility that more fires are being sparked around that area here. All righty. We had kind of a UFO-ish thing here in Hawaii. Apparently some object in orbit suffered a failure. A pressurized tank of something let go, and there was this sort of giant bubble in space that was growing as it continued to orbit overhead, and they got it on video down at the Mauna Kea Observatory. The official story is it was a Minuteman test from Vandenberg. I doubt that simply because Vandenberg doesn't shoot their missiles toward Hawaii, because we take it very personal when they do. And second, the trajectory of the center of this expanding bubble looks more like an Earth-orbiting object rather than an incoming ballistic track. And it was very pretty to see. Obviously, the downside, though, is there's a cloud of debris of some kind that is now in orbit, or multiple orbits, and it may be too small to track. Yeah, some of it burns up in the atmosphere, some of it may go up into higher orbits. But the problem with an object that explodes in orbit is it leaves debris up there orbiting for years and years to come. There's still debris up there being tracked, left over from the Gemini missions. You know, gloves and cameras that were accidentally lost from the spacecraft during the EVAs. And all of that stuff poses a danger to other satellites, including the International Space Station. So we wish them luck and, hope for the best. All right, that's it for our show. We will be back tomorrow. We're going to be spending tomorrow's show talking about the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay angry, stay patriotic, and aloha, America.